hope you've been jiving and grooving along with us in that intro music as I've been snapping to the beat. This is episode 317 for November 26th. This is rounding out the Thanksgiving weekend here in the United States. If you are still walking around with too many carbs in you, I can appreciate that feeling. I am your host tonight, DBQ Hams, for the Enough to Keep Going podcast. Joining me, I am so glad to be back, gentlemen. It has been too long, and thank you for having me back. So, with me tonight is Towmaster99. Tow, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good. That's good. Got my Christmas tree in the background. I'm wearing my Borderlands Christmas sweater, so
Nice.
I am ready for the show. And also on the Wheels of Steel, Game Logic. How are you, sir?
Good, man. Good, man. Glad to be back. Time to talk video games.
It is time, and I want to start with you because you have the most direct comparison that we can. Both you and I this week got a nice little shipment from Valve in terms of a Steam Deck OLED, but you have had the original before, where for me, this was looking back. We're getting close to the end of the year, gentlemen, which means I'm starting to think about our superlative show. Last year on our show, the Steam Deck was my thing I regretted not playing last year, and that will not be the case this year. But Game Logic, you ended up getting yours as well. It sounds like you picked it up you got it shipped around the same time I did, but you must have got a little bit of hands-on. I got a chance. I spent a busy holiday weekend, so I didn't get too much of a chance to play around with it other than kind of the form factor of it. But I'm curious on how that compares between the two units that now that you have both in your hands.
Well, Bob, I'll tell you. So actually, I happened to have a few seconds. So I was running late for the show to
Thank you for bringing
both of
show and
these.
tell as well. This is excellent.
So this is the OLED, and this is the regular.
And you kind of got to flip them around to show the back as well, because there's a difference there, isn't there?
Is there? I don't know. I mean, there's a bit of a difference on the top in that it's the red power button. I don't know that there's that much of a difference in the back. The vents are a little different.
Yeah, that's about it, maybe. Yeah. Thickness of it, is that pretty much the same?
Yeah, pretty much the same. It feels a tad bit lighter, but I think I'm just telling myself. If you notice,
it is a tad bit lighter, right?
Okay.
Like
point something ounces or something like
30
that.
30 ounces or something like that. Yeah, it's not a huge piece.
So I think the thing that I drove myself a little nuts with initially was I was like, how did they make the screen bigger? And I think what they did was they took a little bit out of the bezel. So if you have these things like really close to each other, you can see that the bezel on the OLED here on the top is just a wee bit thinner around the sides than the regular is. Other than that, there's not too much difference. The color scheme on the buttons is a little more subdued than kind of the bright white of the Steam Deck regular. But by and large, it's physically very much the same. I think in gameplay, the thing that I've noticed, and I've only played American Truck Simulator, which was the first game that I played on the Steam Deck when I first got it, and it was kind of the thing that I decided to use to test kind of initial setup this weekend. I've installed a few other games, and I've put Red Dead Redemption 2 on it, which coincidentally happens to be experiencing a bit of a surge, kind of like we saw for Battlefield 2042 a few weeks ago, when Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 kind of tanked. In kind of an opposite synergy, the news of Grand Theft Auto 6 is causing a surge in gameplay of Red Dead Redemption 2 on Steam. At any rate, that kind of prompted me to install Red Dead Redemption 2. I also installed Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered and a couple racing games. But one of the vehicle sims that I installed is American Truck Simulator. And the one thing that I really noticed is the colors on the screen. And actually, it turns out that wound up being like a really good game to pick to test, because the initial truck, because I'm just, I've played about 10 hours or so of American Truck Simulator over the past couple years, just dipping into it every once in a while. But the intro truck you're given that shows in the startup screen is a red truck. And you could really see the reds kind of pop off the truck. But the other thing that's really kind of quantifiable is that I was playing it a couple of weeks ago on my regular Steam Deck, and what I noticed was the highway signs in California as I'm making runs. I was like, man, these signs are like really, really difficult to read. And they are a lot more clear. I won't quite say crystal clear, but it feels like crystal clear, right? Just because of the delta. But I can clearly see, okay, that's Highway I-80, that's Highway I-5, interstate, and I can see. And one of the things is, the GPS in American Truck Simulator it's not like your in-car GPS. It's not constantly telling you to turn left and turn right and get in the left-hand lane and the right-hand lane. I'm sure there are mods out there that do that. But you have to constantly like move your eyes back and forth between like the windshield and the GPS, because yes, you have GPS, but you have to like consciously keep your eye on it to know when to turn. And then you don't know any road signs. But you can clearly read road signs, right? When you're seeing these signs up above the thing. So, text is a lot more clear on the screen. So that's one of the things that I noticed playing the game. But obviously, colors pop, and hopefully I'll have an opportunity to kind of test that out some more with some other games. I mentioned to you, DBQ. I tipped over. So when I saw you go into tip over, I said I was on the fence, and I was like, DBQ went. I just fell right down the hole, down the hill after
now
you.
it's gotta happen.
Peer pressure at its finest.
Yes, and I had been sizing it up. I had put one in my cart, and then I had backed out of it. But one of the things that really interested me was I'd read all of the things that were changes, and I was like, well, none of these are really material, but I'm really curious about the additional transfer speed in the memory. And I realized, Valve was very cautious to say, it's not a performance update. And I'm like, okay, not a performance update, but like something should be different, right? And I had been playing Horizon Zero Dawn a couple of weeks ago as well, alongside American Truck Simulator. And what HCD reminded me of is this original Steam Deck does this thing where it will start to frame rate stutter. And I've seen this on Uncharted as well. And what it will do is it's what I was talking about a couple of weeks ago when we talked about EAWRC, and I said it's this cobweb effect. It's right. It's like you're running and then it's like you're grabbed by cobwebs. And sometimes it will recover, but when it hits this point where you get grabbed by cobwebs and you start to see that kind of degrading, what will happen is it feels like, it seems like it gets into a state where memory stops feeding the game sufficiently, and then it just kind of starts to unravel. And eventually, and that's when I have seen crashes on the Steam Deck. And I was like, well, if the memory transfer rate is a bit higher, what I expect to see fewer instances of that, and I essentially expect to see better overall stability and more smoothness, right, in gameplay in those situations where, in Horizon Zero Dawn, I would see it when there are those scenes where there are parties attacking, like a small location or a lot of monsters or a lot of like raiders attacking. And then as the number of people on screen multiply and there's more projectiles and things flying around, I'll see it kind of unravel, right, and unspool. And I was like, I think it would be worth it to me, right, for the increased transfer rate of the memory, to see if that improves, overall gameplay. And I haven't personally seen it, but I mentioned to you, I had listened to Digital Foundry's, I think their podcast is called Digital Foundry Direct or something like that. And they had mentioned and I think they have an article up where they have seen things like 8% performance improvement, 6% performance improvement. I want to say, don't quote me on it. I thought I saw like a particularly high one, like in the 20 something percentile, close to 30. But that was enough also to make me go, okay, right. Well, at that point I had already ordered it, but I was kind of thinking, well, maybe I'll cancel it because I was jockeying back and forth with when this thing was going to arrive as I was heading out of town for Thanksgiving. But like when I listened to that, I was like, okay, nope, I'm sticking with it. Like they're seeing tangible improvements, and that's worth it.
Yeah, that was a good podcast suggestion. So that was a good segment there in terms of that, and when
So
they're comparing it to the ROG Ally. So
yes, yeah. So how about you? How's your experience been? I know you said you just had a chance to dabble, but
yeah, just dabble a little bit. I think really the thing that I was always a little bit hesitant on was its form factor in terms of its size and kind of heft, and feeling it in my hands, it feels not as heavy as I expected. And maybe it's because I had built it up. It's a You're right. It's a beautiful screen. It is just a beautiful screen, and that OLED sure makes a difference. I mean, this is. I love my OLED Switch. There's, I still break out my Vita with its OLED screen. Like there's a benefit to that type of quality, and in that small piece. I've played a lot of the things I've played have been some smaller games, not a whole lot yet. I'll come back to them because there's a bunch of smaller indie stuff that I'm trying to clean up as we head to the end of the year. But then I have just been downloading Gotham Knights, so I want to give that one a try because I know what it runs like on a PlayStation 5. So give some comparison there as well. But yeah, the form factor is really, really enjoyable in terms of not too, distance wise between the hands feels good. The weight feels good. It's not, I don't feel like I'm struggling to hold it up. Be curious to see kind of what the battery life looks like running something more intense. Like the reports are that there is a little bit better of battery life, but that's kind of, it's small depending on what you're running. So we'll see. But yeah, I found I am looking forward to spending more time with it over the holidays.
yeah, I haven't had a chance to battery test. I will just say from the fiddling around with the options in the settings screen. I can't remember what it's called, but it's the right hand setting screen, not the left hand setting screen. And I actually see significant rate, at least improved projections of battery life, which is a thing,
yeah.
right? It's somewhat of value. Yeah.
Yep, definitely. No, and again for that kind of, it's not like it's a impulse buy price point, but it is in that kind of, it's not drastically different than where it was 2 years ago when it launched in terms of price points. So yeah, I know that I'll be talking about it more in the coming weeks as I continue to play around with it. So that is our big kind of new item for the week. We've got a couple other games that we have been playing in terms of our big games, but most of them are not brand new releases. So Game Logic, I have this game on PC, which but you picked it up or playing it on Xbox, is the Outer Worlds Spacer Choice. So this is the Obsidian developed kind of Fallout like in space from 2019, 2018, somewhere in there. And then it came back with the kind of high res texture packs and HDR and all kinds of kind of current gen upgrades for it in the Spacer's Choice edition. So you played it originally when it came out? What caused you to pull the trigger? Because this is not one that's on Game Pass. This is a individual purchase, correct?
Correct. And actually I didn't play it when it first came out. So this is one I may have played a variant in Game Pass. But it was like I just like kind of got it started. I didn't really play through it at all.
Nice.
And I definitely didn't play it at launch.
Yeah, Terrell over in the chat. Yes, well, it's kind of an update, right? It's still the same game. There's not any new content. It is more of quality of life and graphical performances in the Spacer's Choice update.
Yeah, I guess I would kind of characterize it. It's like all a matter of perspective. It's like so. I mean, it is the next gen version. So kind of if you want to think about like Cyberpunk, right, as kind of the retail model. It is a game that was originally released for Xbox One, and then a year later, they delivered an Xbox Series update. So it has those graphical enhancements in it. And then as far as content goes, again, if you just played the original, this has all of the additional DLC, which I guess is 2 additional DLC packs. So I went ahead and because it is a release for this year, because it came out in March of 2023. I guess I kind of lied. As I'll talk about tonight, I talked how I didn't have a big November glut of games to go back and revisit that I had missed and passed on early in the year. I did have a little bit of cleanup to do, and this is one of the things that was kind of on my radar. The Witcher 3 series version also released at the beginning of this year. The PlayStation 5 and PC updates had come out in the end of 2022.
Well, one of the differences here with this is that if you own the original, you still have to purchase the upgrade. Where like the Witcher 1, if you own the Witcher 3 in some other capacity, those upgrades, those graphical enhancements come as a free download. Where this is a additional purchase, even if you own the game.
And so here we are yet again this week, before 2023 can run out, to have me mention yet again how the store is so ganked up with next gen. Like in this one, it's actually to a certain case. I think the last time I mentioned this, it was with the Crew Motorfest. I think I've mentioned one other game since then, but this is one where there's no continuity between like the versions. Like normally you go into the Xbox store, and this is not, I mean, I've encountered this in the Xbox store. The PlayStation store is the same way in a lot of cases. Sometimes it's a little more cleaned up. I will say I feel like Sony has done a good job of like, when you buy the PlayStation 5 version, it only presents like, or makes very clear, this is the PlayStation 5 version. Do you want to download the PlayStation 5 version? Whereas at the beginning of the generation, like it was very unclear, and a lot of times you would download the PlayStation 4 version. But this is one where like the different variants of the Outer Worlds, like it doesn't have the standard Xbox Store version. Choose additional editions, like it has for like 99% of every other game. So they're all listed separately. So
right, it's treating this like a separate SKU versus a different edition within the same game.
Yeah, which just causes you to like, clench your gut, a little bit when you go to push that buy button, because God forbid you actually start the game up, right, and it attaches to your gamer tag, and then you can't get a refund if you let it play too far. But so this was, like I said, I went to the store and bought this. It looks great. What seriously impresses me with this game, and I'm not talking about it tonight, but I also played Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, and I felt the same way. I was like, playing Fallen Order, I'm like, this game looks better than Survivor did at launch, and plays smoother, and I don't get it. And in a lot of ways, while the Outer Worlds is not doing everything Starfield does, like and again, it's years after polish, right? So it's not. I'm not saying it's a fair comparison. I'm just saying it's a comparison. I was like, I played the game and I was like, wow, this feels like amazingly smooth in comparison to like my initial Starfield experience. So, I was really impressed. And like I said, it also caused me to remind myself that, as I've often claimed, Obsidian is probably the best pickup that Xbox has made, in the acquisitions that started in 2018. Although they've been allowed to go off and do Pentiment and Grounded, which I'm sure they fill a need, but I'm like, there are other things that I want from them. But this reminded me that high hopes for for the second version of this thing, which they're working on. But yeah, I was really, really impressed with it. Played really smooth. Still holds up graphically, in my opinion. Like you mentioned, kind of hits all the bells and buttons of, wanting kind of that Fallout kind of feel. That, of course, makes it more limited in scope from a perspective of a comparison to Starfield. But it plays really solidly, and it's kind of like I hate to use the term because sometimes people think that I'm using it in a derogatory manner, but when the game of the year conversations went around and some of the big release comparisons went around about like Starfield versus Spider-Man 2, right? One of my things that I said was, look, you have to understand and you have to understand and acknowledge that Spider-Man 2 is kind of a throat lozenge game, right? It's very easy, it's very digestible. Not in terms of like it's easy, because there are actually quite a few things about Spider-Man that are different, but like it's a thing that the mainstream can grasp. Like it doesn't have, like we talked about Starfield, right? And you guys heard a lot of like the very minor tributaries and rivulets, right, that I went down with like base building and all kinds of esoteric stuff that is well outside the norm of the mainstreamer. Whereas Spider-Man is like a big turkey dinner, right? It just sits in front of you on your plate, and it's meat and potatoes, and it's kind of easy to onboard and get into. And that's kind of the way that I feel this game is. So very happy with it, and looking forward to playing some more of it, and looks great on Xbox Series X in my opinion.
Nice, and thanks for the comparison with Starfield there. That was a valuable piece to kind of frame up between the two of them. Tao, let's finally get you on the mic. Thanks for being patient here. You are going back, and so you picked up Pokemon and Violet again. So if I recall, you finished the story of this earlier this year. Did you go back to it because of the DLC coming out in December, or what got you back to your Pokedex?
Yeah, I mean, I went back to it because of the DLC, but I never picked up the previous DLC yet. I might still do that, and technically, I guess I beat the story, at least the first part of it. There's another part of it once you beat it where you have to go through all the gyms again, which I find kind of annoying. But I'm not even sure if I'm going to do that. I'm just I'm going through a shiny hunt right now. Which, if you don't know what a shiny is in Pokemon, it's kind of it's like a different. I don't want to say different version. It's basically just got a different color to it, to the Pokemon. And they're supposed to be special and all that. So it's like, I think I might have one. I was gonna go through my boxes of Pokemon, but I got like a million of them. So I was like, I'm not gonna go through all of them to figure out which one I have now. So I'll just try to find some now, or more. Even if I do have one, it's probably only one, because they're pretty hard to find. And now that I actually beat that first part of the campaign, I guess you want to call it, you can make some stuff that'll give you some better chances to finding them. So I want to start doing that and just kind of going through it. So I kind of just dipped my toes in it like right before the holiday, because I had been, once again, I think I mentioned last week, I'm taking the train a little bit more for work, so I have some time. So I started doing that, and I started playing it on the train, and now I've been pretty much playing it throughout the whole holiday season, the Thanksgiving season. So it's kind of nice. And I've just been, first couple times I jumped into it, I was just trying to get my my Pokemon legs back, just trying to figure out controls and stuff like that. So I was just fighting like random things, here and there, and then doing some of the terror raids, which is kind of like the big raid battles you can do with actual other people if you want to, which I usually do. And then another thing I learned too, so there's certain like special Pokemon they'll throw out there. I don't know if it's like every month or maybe once a quarter or something like that. I got to look back to see what the actual intervals are, but you can only get those in a black terror raid, which is basically like the crystal you see in the world where the raids are. There's like purple and yellow and I think green, maybe. There's different level. It's basically just levels. And the black one is like one of the highest ones, but you can only do that now, I find out, if you beat that second part of the campaign. So I was like, oh, it's great. And that's where the special Pokemon are. So I might do like at least one or two of the gyms just to see if they're like super, super hard. Hopefully they're not like too much harder than like that first round. Like I really didn't have any problems until the last, I think maybe the last two battles I did of like the main gyms, and then the very last the rival you have in the game, she was just kicking my butt too. So I had and she's like the very last person you beat, even after you beat like the tournament part of it, because she's your rival, so you got to beat her again, or you meet her multiple times throughout the game. So this is kind of the last meeting that you do with her, and she was just ripping me apart. So I had to grind a lot to get to beat her, and then so I'm assuming you'll have to probably beat her again once you get through everybody again. So I don't know. I don't know if I have that kind of time again that I can put through it, since I got all these other games that I still want to play. But I just enjoy the game, and it looks like they fixed some things. Like I don't see as much jank as there was before graphically. Like if you were in the in-world game, like 20, 30 yards away, the people wouldn't be like, if there's a person, even just like a single person. Well, most of the time I saw, if there's like a person in the Pokemon like walking in the world, it would be like super like laggy and like janky, like they wouldn't be walking smoothly. But now it looks like that's fixed at least. And I think there was kind of that too, just with some of the wild Pokemon you might see out in the world, where it was like that movement just wasn't quite right. It looked like it's fixed
Yeah,
now.
I remember the conversations of it having quite a bit of kind of frame rate stutter and a little bit of jank there.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was just because I haven't played it in so long, but it looks really nice now. Like, I mean, it's still not like the best looking game that you'd ever see on the Switch, but it looks. I don't know. It just seemed like a lot better looking to me for some reason. So maybe they did a little bit of improvements here and there, possibly. And I'm still playing on like an old, my original Switch that I got, in launch year. So I don't even have an OLED yet. So, but it looks fine to me. But yeah, I'm just doing that now. Just like I said, I'm gonna keep going, try to do some more shiny hunting, probably do more terror raids. I just kind of like that, just because you can battle with other people, which is actually kind of nice. And every once in a while, I think I picked it up like one other time, maybe during the summer, because my son all of a sudden wanted to play it again. We played it together when we first got it, or when I first got it, and he was able to play with it because we do the sharing on our Switches. But I think he wanted to play again during the summer, so I picked up just for a little bit, like a week, maybe 2 weeks. And then now I'm picking it up again. So it's kind of nice. I like it.
Nice. Well, you were playing a game from last year, and I'll go back 27 years to talk about the game that I was playing. So I picked up the Super Mario RPG remake on Nintendo Switch. So I was also playing my Switch. And Super Mario RPG remake is exactly what it claims to be. I have some great nostalgia for this game. It came out in 96, and I can remember playing it in my college dorm and skipping meals to keep playing it as other people walked past me and invited me to come to dinner. I remember having the Nintendo strategy guide for it in order to figure out where the hidden door was for the Final Fantasy boss that was locked away. So I've got some emotional attachment to this, which is good, because if I didn't, it is cute and fun, but also kind of like a great RPG intro, which I guess is kind of what it was back in the day as well, right? It is not super deep. It is from the kind of what has evolved even in the Mario RPG with the Paper Marios and the Mario and Luigi, and that those two breakouts of that franchise. That the mechanics are much deeper in other games. It is pretty limited and thin in that way. It doesn't mean it's not fun. It's incredibly fun, but it's also not as deep as some of those other experiences. So coming back to it without any nostalgia or with a frame of reference for those other games that have more layers, it feels dated in that way. The graphics are great. It is a nice kind of polish on what it is, but it still doesn't play a whole lot differently, which makes it a authentic remaster, but incredibly fun. But if that franchise has not necessarily sung to you in other iterations, I don't know that this does it either. But if it's always been something that you're curious about, or if you're playing Mario Wonder with younger family members, this is a game that is definitely accessible for younger family members as well. So Super Mario RPG, I'm glad I have it. I'm definitely, it's nice to revisit some of those emotional times. And I'll keep playing it, but it's not considering all the other remakes that we've had over the course of the year in terms of Dead Space and Resident Evil and Metroid Prime. This is definitely a polish up and not necessarily any type of kind of gameplay modernization in here, though. All right, ready to head to some news, gentlemen? Game Logic, why don't you take us through? We got 2 lawsuits here to talk about after we've finally cleansed our palate of all the Microsoft and Activision Blizzard lawsuits. We still have a Sony one here to talk about, but now we also have a Valve one, which is coming back. The Valve lawsuit that you talk about originally was kind of dismissed in 21 and refiled in 22, and now we get a little more information about it. So, legal correspondent, Game Logic, thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, this is actually usually Tao's beat, so I'm encroaching a little bit. We'll chalk that up to the Thanksgiving holiday. And actually, these lawsuits are not getting a ton of noise, and actually would have flown underneath the radar if I kind of hadn't shifted my paradigm of kind of how I'm pulling news from the feeds. But these two wound up coming up on my radar over the weekend. So the first one over on Kotaku, Sony fails to kill $7.9 billion lawsuit over PlayStation Store prices. And I quote, a lawsuit filed last year, this story from Ethan Gatch. A lawsuit filed last year accused Sony of using its walled garden video game platform to charge players too much in the PlayStation Store. The London Tribunal has now allowed that lawsuit to move forward against the PS5 makers' objections, which could result in payments to players in the UK of up to $7.9 billion if it is ultimately successful. So the basic gist of this, and I'm not absolutely certain that Kotaku has it right, what they're asserting the point of the lawsuit is a complaint by the plaintiff that Sony is using anti-competitive practices to charge a 30% cut that it's obviously taking for itself, instead of charging, and that cut is causing an artificial inflation of prices by suppliers, because suppliers are trying to compensate for the fact that they're losing 30% of revenue to Sony, instead of Sony taking a smaller cut and passing that saving then onto customers. What the lawsuit, what Kotaku says the lawsuit is also asserting is that Sony is blocking out competition by not allowing third parties to sell directly on the PlayStation Store. Now, obviously, I don't know UK law. This is a lawsuit that has been allowed to proceed through by the London Tribunal. It was, I guess, an opinion was delivered by the Competition Appeal Tribunal. And as we all remember from the Activision, UK Microsoft thing, the CAT was a board that the CMA appeals to. But as far as I know from a US perspective, that seems to be a duck that doesn't walk. Like, you're allowed to have a store and not allow other people to have access to your store. What in a comparison to the Epic lawsuit, and the Epic lawsuit to me, and again, I may very well have it wrong, to me is more about the fact that, Google and Apple, and again, their approaches are different, but I'll start with Apple. Apple doesn't allow you to obtain apps by any other means than going through the Apple Store. They lock the phone down, so that is the only place that it can procure apps. Google will allow you to sideload apps, but basically they heavily incentivize and kind of strong arm you into going through the Google Play Store, unless you're Android savvy and know how to work around that and know how to get into settings and allow sideloading of apps. And so Epic kind of brings the same complaint against Google, that basically it's wielding the tyranny of default. So it'll be interesting to see if this thing goes through again. I mean, yes, Amazon, for instance, has a storefront and opens its storefront to have access to other people, for which it charges a fee. That would seem to be essentially what PlayStation is doing. By the same token, I also haven't seen it being successful that you tell a vendor that you have to open your storefront that you've invested to bring to realize, and you have to give other people access to that. So it'll be interesting to see if this duck walks in London. Tao, you are our foremost legal expert. Any opinions on this case?
Well, I don't know about that, but so they mentioned the I guess they call him the consumer advocate, but he's not, as far as we know, or as far as he's not. Is he a developer or anything like that, or is he just a total consumer? He's just a guy out there buying games.
It lists him as a consumer advocate. So I think this is he's either a lawyer who specializes in this or runs a business. Just like many states have like a consumer advocacy board, and there are various non-government institutions that will intercede on behalf of of consumers, right, with certain industries.
Okay. All right. I was just wondering because as I was reading the article before, I was just like, well, I don't know if it really says like if is it just like a developer that's and I could see that too, like if developers yeah, and the developer side it might be more on the side of them getting the 30%, taking a chunk out of their their what they'd get, but I don't know, but anyways, yeah, I mean it's interesting that they're this is actually going through, and I know this is in the UK too, so I don't maybe stuff like this kind of gets goes through the I don't want to say the ringer, but kind of goes through the system a little bit more, a little bit more often than you might see it here, because something like this might be like, yeah, it's getting thrown out, we don't care about you or whatever, something like that. But I'm just wondering like how this will play out, and if in the future if say it it does go through and they lose, is this opening them up for the other countries to for people to do the same thing, or will they just kind of across the board say, okay, we lost in the US or we lost in the UK, so we're gonna we'll make everything good everywhere, which I kind of doubt. But I don't know what your thought on that part of it might be.
Well, it doesn't seem to be it's getting through on legal merit, as far as strength of the case. It seems like it's getting through based on procedural paperwork and process. And so kind of if you go back to the gamers lawsuit right here in the US of the group that brought the lawsuit against Xbox, for that was a civilian lawsuit claiming anti-competitive behavior on the part of Microsoft and Xbox in the Activision acquisition, and originally that case was thrown out because the plaintiff simply hadn't proven their case. So the judge didn't take the stance that your case has no merit. It's that you didn't do the homework, right, and provide a strong enough argument. And it seems to be the same thing here, And then on appeal or in a do-over, she did approve that case, right, to at least move past right the previous stage that it had. And so it says here that the ruling of that the advisement of the CAT to the London Tribunal was that Sony failed to establish that the complaint has no reasonable grounds for making the claims, or to establish that it has no real prospect of succeeding at trial. So it didn't necessarily say that Sony didn't have a legal precedent for, or an illegal claim, that this was, frivolous, or, that it didn't have any grounds. It said they essentially didn't prove their case. So as you said, it'll be interesting to kind of see how this thing goes through. I don't.
And if
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Oh, I was gonna say if I'm not reading this correctly, but it's similar to the next story you'll talk about Valve's of what they're
Yeah, it is,
basically
right?
going to court for.
30% of a publisher cut or the storefront cut ties right into the Valve story. Nice segue, Tao. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I didn't take your job.
So this story over on IGN by Ryan Dinsdale, Valve CEO Gabe Newell ordered to attend an in-person antitrust lawsuit deposition. Gabe Newell has been ordered to attend an in-person deposition relating to Overgrowth developer Wolfire Games' antitrust lawsuit against Valve, despite its request to do it remotely. As reported by GameIndustry.biz, the Valve CEO had requested the remote deposition due to concerns regarding COVID-19, but the court said he presented insubstantial evidence to suggest that he is at particularized risk of serious illness. So that note, nothing to do with the case, just didn't achieve the procedural in the process of establishing that he didn't need to be there. But the lawsuit is a claim. This one filed in the U.S. District U.S. District Court for the Western District of Washington. Included a statement from Wolfire Games, I'm quoting the article here, which said Newell is uniquely positioned to testify on all aspects of Valve's business strategy, and an in-person deposition would allow it to adequately assess Newell's credibility. And so basically kind of what the bells it rings in my mind is if you go back to, the video recorded deposition of Bill Gates back in the DOJ antitrust proceedings at the turn of the century. What they want is they want an in-person interview. They don't want something manufactured, edited, cut, chopped, put together. They want an opportunity to kind of question this key witness face to face in person with no time delay involved. So this, of course, we've talked about this for years and years and years and years, and that and it really, let's go back in history before the Epic Game Store. And this is a key thing that I think people and the media gained a deep rooted misunderstanding about in the Xbox hearings for the Activision acquisition. So number one, we take this hyper focus on antitrust as solely antitrust and monopoly. It is not solely anti-monopoly. It is antitrust and anti-competition, right? The whole point of it being that these regulatory bodies and the courts are supposed to theoretically intervene before the notion of a monopoly can be achieved, because once a monopoly has been achieved, it is incredibly difficult to unravel it, and it is harmful, right? Not to only businesses and maybe even consumers in the short term, but also to the employees of that business. You go back to like the way we broke apart Ma Bell, back in the 80s. So the point is to prevent these things from proceeding down that path. But the other thing is that, like I said, it's not just antitrust. It's also anti-competition. And one of the other things that people deep-rooted misunderstanding is that one of the key reasons why it's not anti-monopoly is because monopolies in and of themselves are not illegal. There are types of monopolies that are allowed to exist. Geographic regional monopolies, as enforced by government regulation, such as in the case of your ISPs and your cable companies. There is a thing called natural monopolies that are allowed to exist because they didn't necessarily happen, arguably because of anti-competitive practices, but simply because only one company developed the domain expertise to create a product. That's why Microsoft hasn't been separated from Microsoft Office or Windows, right? Which they clearly have, a very natural monopoly on, right? Yes, there are competitors, but there are no real competitors, right, to those products in the enterprise. And so Steam, right, if you go back to the period of time before the Epic Game Store, is a natural monopoly, right? In terms of digital procurement of video games. And so, again, it's going to be tough, right, to win this case, because there's not necessarily, the argument is that Valve didn't necessarily strong arm, right, the market into becoming the only purveyor of digital video games, or the principle, or now just like, again, we haven't busted up Google because Google didn't necessarily hold people at gunpoint and insist that they use their search engine. They just created the best search engine. So, it'll be interesting to see how this thing goes. I don't know, DBQ, any thoughts?
No, I think how much of a merit, right? The idea between this lawsuit and some of the other similar ones as we've talked about. I'll be curious, right, to see how much of this is, how far this goes, and what are the repercussions. Like you were talking about in terms of the monopoly aspect, like what is that? It's certainly a little harder to argue that it's a natural. I mean, that it has the same foothold on the PC game distribution market than it did in 2001 when this was first, filed. Granted, since that time, we've also seen all the other paperwork about how much Epic has spent trying to break into that market as well. So potentially there, it could be a very interesting path, but so we'll see.
in chat, Ramon Tamarel says, all of this is ground the publishing industry has tread. It's fascinating to see the parallels. And yeah, I agree. Ramon and I have talked about that. One of the other things that I'll mention is, again, another thing that people just vastly got wrong. The media also vastly got wrong. Much ado was made about the FTC's attempt to define the market, right, in terms of the Xbox Activision acquisition. But again, you need to go back and you need to look at historical precedent. The FTC has to define the market every single time, because the natural innate way that some people might define it is not necessarily the topic of conversation, right, in a given trial, right? So just as I just talked about, there's definitely an argument, unquestionably, that Steam, again, going back before the Epic Game Store, had a monopoly on digital game distribution. But you could also easily walk into that conversation and say, but digital is not the only way to procure video games. And so therefore, how can you call it a monopoly? So every single time that the FTC takes a case to trial, it always has to define the market. And that is often right in the case of like Amazon and Whole Foods, or Amazon or Whole Foods, and I can't remember what smaller distributor Whole Foods acquired before Amazon acquired them. There was a need to define the boutique grocery market, right? Because it's not necessarily the same. Piggly Wiggly and Food Lion do not compete head-to-head against Harris Teeter, right? And Whole Foods, right? There are definitely stratifications of a market, and there are points where, if once you're a consumer and you move upscale enough, right, and you're shopping for BMW, Mercedes, and a Range Rover, you're not shopping for a Chevy or a Ford, right? And so Chevy and Ford don't naturally compete against them at the same level for the same demographic of customer and addressable market. So, that has to be done every single time one of these things goes to trial, or else, there would never be any, right, antitrust or anti-competition trials.
Good point. And Ramon, thanks for jumping in and adding that perspective as well. So, Game Logic, let's finish out the news stories here. I was talking about a 1996 game, but you've got a 2006 game to talk about. I had not thought about Petroglyph Studios in a long time. Granted, they just did the Command and Conquer remaster a couple years ago, but you're taking us back to Star Wars Empire at War.
I'm taking you back to arguably, in my opinion, the best Star Wars RTS. I was not a huge fan.
Is that a hard argument to make? What we have the Age of Empires, skin mod, and then we have Rebellion, which was really kind of janky and broken.
And people will often make the argument for that Age of Empires paint job. That game was fun, but it was just an AT-AT rush, was the only thing in that game. So at any rate, we're talking about Star Wars Empire at War. This story over on VG247 by Stephanie Nunley Jackson. Star Wars Empire at War has been updated to 64-bit 17 years after release. Here's a nice surprise for you. Petroglyph has updated its strategy RTS, Star Wars Empire at War, 70 years post-release. The update mainly allows the game to run in 64-bit, but it also fixes some minor bugs, applies some balance changes, fixes out-of-sync issues with multiplayer, and stops some behavior issues with units. Takes care of things like, things that will eventually lead to unhandled exceptions, out-of-memory issues, memory leaks, things like that. Also, inherently makes the application more secure, because it doesn't leave it prone to, a lot of the 32-bit hacks and exploits. I think the main thing about this is, I personally picked up on this story because I am a huge fan of Star Wars Empire at War, and I definitely need to go check it out. Actually, it's on sale on the Steam store for 65% off, so it's $7. I need to check and see if I already own it, but I think a key thing is, earlier in this year, there was a lot of discussion about the lack of game preservation, right? There was the survey that came out that showed that was some 80-something% of all games prior to 2000 something, like there's no way to get back to them. And so there was somewhat of an outcry about, I think a lot of those outcries are people crying wolf, because I don't know that they would actually go back and play those games if they had access to them. But, for some people, I spent time on this Thanksgiving holiday in a retro arcade created by two brothers who just had a big collection of arcade cabinets and pinballs, and they were just like, we have the largest collection of this stuff in the whole state, so let's just throw it in it's actually in a house. It's not actually a commercial building. Let's throw it in a house, charge people $10 to come in and let them play. And so it was this great experience of going back and playing, all these 80 retro games in the arcade. Slide aside. I'll also, at some point we should talk about the fact that home consoles actually are a great fork in the evolution of video games, because if we had never pulled games out of the arcade, there are some games that we just would have never gotten, right? And so, like, you're not going to chunk quarters into a Horizon Zero Dawn machine, right? And so the advent of at-home consoles and PC gaming actually just led to a whole evolution of video games that would have never happened had they remained encased in arcades. But at any rate, my point is that concurrent with this, we have also seen Half-Life, right, get a treatment and an update, which had been a long time coming, and you would have thought would have happened already, but it hadn't. But now it has. The Steam Deck is causing a revitalization in some ways of wanting to get older games running, because now they can be made available on Steam Deck. So it is nice to see the industry and the market taking a slight turn, at least in terms of game preservation and updating some of these games, and hopefully we'll see more of that as well.
All right, well, let's move into our final segment as we round the corner here in the last bit of the show. We've got a few other games that we've been playing over the course of this week, or in my case, a few weeks ago, since I haven't been here to talk about it. I was going through the list of kind of highly scored, rated kind of contenders for the year, looking at some of the indies that I hadn't had a chance to pick up and play, and Dredge was there. So Dredge, I played a little bit on PlayStation. This is the kind of horror fishing game. It is basically a fishing game to start with, but you have kind of a day-night timer, and if you stay out as it becomes dusk and night, you begin to hallucinations, potentially monsters and creatures, kind of Lovecraftian aspects of things. But then there is this: you go back out during the daytime, and slowly there's multiple threads of a story that unravel here as you're in this small little isolated fishing village. There's a little bit of Tetris / Resident Evil inventory management, trying to fit your fish into the right shape to catch as many fish as you can during the time that you have. You've got upgrades to increase your fishing. So it's very calm in the fishing aspect, and there's a nice little mechanic there for reeling in your fish. But that calmness is kind of cut by this foreboding sense that night is coming. That every time that you reel out and try to go out a little further, you know that it's going to take longer to get back, and that night is coming, and eventually you can get upgrades to your boat that allow you to go out fishing in the night for some of the horrors that are out there. But it has this nice kind of balance of kind of calm, soothing music, but also this creeping dread that comes with the atmosphere. So it's done very well. I enjoyed what I played. I also know that it's not my type of game to sit in so that's okay. I mean, I enjoy video game fishing to some degree, and it does what it does very well and has a great sense of atmosphere. So I'm glad I got a chance to check it out. I don't know that I know that I played it for a couple days, and I have not gone back to it. So I guess that tells me all that I need to say.
So did you already have this game on PlayStation 5?
No, this is thank you to my local library that is picking up not only big name games, but some indie boxed editions of things as well. So
this would seem to be a thing that was very ripe for playing on the Steam Deck.
Yeah, I mean, again, probably what I think it could be excellent on the Steam Deck, right? It's very kind of calm. Playing it on big TV was kind of a waste of the graphical powerhouse. But I'm also, I will say that, I don't know that I'll be purchasing it to add to the Steam Deck, just by my own enjoyment of it. So, but yes, it would fit very well on on a Steam Deck in terms of kind of the kind of isolated solo experience that it creates.
It is, just to put in a plug for it, it is 25% off on the Steam Autumn sale now. So $19 essentially.
There you
You
go.
can even get the deluxe edition for $26. It's rated overwhelmingly positive by the Steam community at 97%.
Yep, and I think
Seemingly unheard of.
I think it's in some of the nominations for indie games of the year and new release, smaller developer types of things. So definitely, if the kind of life sim farming aspect of a fishing game sounds interesting, or the horror aspect, it's a nice mix of both, and it does something different, right? I think that's a benefit in this smaller indie space, is that you do get the chance to kind of play around with some different things. And yes, so while I did not pick up this on the Steam sale, I picked up plenty of other things on the Steam sale this past weekend for my Steam Deck, so I'll have more to talk about next week in terms of trying to round out some of the smaller indie games that were released this year that might be worth having some conversation around. But we're going to go from a small indie game to yes, very much psychological horror, Ramon. Thank you. Yeah, there's definitely and it does that well. Like, and there are some nice features there, both in the atmosphere and in the storytelling and the narrative, that kind of play to that in terms of what is really going on and how this island and chain of islands is kind of set aside and plagued by these horrors. So, all right, moving on to something that is much bigger. Game Logic, earlier in the show, you talked about the kind of poor press that Modern Warfare 3 was getting, and now it's on your playlist. So, what caused you to play? And as somebody who has enjoyed Modern Warfare 2, how does this compare for you?
Yeah, so I wound up picking this up mostly on the recommendation of one of my co-hosts on the Basement Radio Arcade podcast, Slow Mo Backslop, who Ramon and some of the other viewers are familiar with. Slow Mo was asked what his top shooters for the year were, and he actually ranked Modern Warfare 3 as his second. Now, this isn't like a huge year for shooters, so let's put that out there. But the fact that he ranked it second without any caveats to it told me, well, maybe it's something that warrants me checking it out. My feelings on this thing are super torn right now. In terms of my personal enjoyment of it, it's kind of funny that a lot of these maps that have come back are from the era where I dropped off of Modern Warfare. So I played Modern Warfare 2. It's Modern Warfare 2 that has like the mission in the airport, right, where you're basically forced to kill a bunch of civilians. Yeah. So I played that single player campaign, and then I just entirely dropped off the face of the map with the multiplayer, because that was the point where, kind of from a societal evolution perspective, like Xbox Live and in the Call of Duty crowd just got completely kind of toxic, and that was the point where I just stopped playing games with my with the headset on and voice chat and all that kind of stuff. But I just dropped off of Call of Duty entirely, right? Having been someone who literally played the first game on PC and then had kind of grown up with that series in the early 2000s. So I'm not familiar with these maps. It's a huge learning curve. I definitely have to go back to kind of my map approach that I normally take with every year's release of Call of Duty, and pull the blueprints, right, for all the maps, and create notes on my phone and on my tablet, right, and actually kind of understand the spawn points and all that kind of stuff. So turns out I have to do that work. I don't get out of that this year, even though this is arguably a continuation. I think I mentioned maybe on this show, or I definitely have mentioned on Twitter, Assassin's Creed Mirage is getting accolades galore right now. It also started off as DLC for Assassin's Creed Valhalla. And for whatever reason, that game is getting accolades, but Modern Warfare 3 is getting slagged for having the same point of origin. And so maybe it's a matter of just whether it's a good game or not. I don't know right now if Modern Warfare 3, just talking about the multiplayer, is a bad game. It's super interesting. I feel like after having lived outside of the Call of Duty pool for several years, but having recently come back, like since 2019, I feel like one of the haves versus the have-nots. I made the investment of playing, Modern Warfare 2 last year, and if you kind of roll back just in terms of kind of experience and like, you know, I don't want to say skill, but just familiarity with the franchise, right? Having played Modern Warfare, Black Ops Cold War, skipping Vanguard, let's not talk about that, and then Modern Warfare 2, I feel rewarded. It's an interesting approach, this whole thing of maintaining this continuity and not starting over and feeling like, okay, I've invested the time before. Maybe I deserve having a chunk of weapon upgrades, right? And how the argument that, there are lots of players that get a leg up and it's punishing to new players who don't have all those weapon unlocks. I'm kind of like, okay, I think I mentioned on the show, maybe I did or not, but I'm like, it's like that every year. Like every year I go into multiplayer and I wind up playing movement kiddies who have been dumping 40 to 60 hours a week right into the game, who are at level 50 something, have already cleared like all of the military ranks and are prestiging, right? And I have to slog my way up, and they have an advantage. And you just have to fight through that, and you're not going to have the highest KD at the start if you come to the game late. That's kind of why I've stopped playing the single player campaigns, so I can get as quickly into the multiplayer. So I don't particularly feel like that makes it any worse than any year. So getting into this game, you have to, even if you have the weapon unlocks, you still have to get promoted to level 4, and then you can utilize custom loadouts. So, I had to spend a few hours on the front end to get to a point where I could even use all of my weapon unlocks. But then as soon as I got that, it's super nice to have loadouts, right, that you can go to with weapons and weapon platforms that you've already unlocked and not have to go through that slog of, and eventually, because it's just living the life of Call of Duty is going through the slog. It's going through the grind. Yes, I equipped my Lockman 5.56 where I'm leveled, that weapon is already at level 19 of 19 and I have all of these things unlocked and available for it. But number one, you don't have immediate access to the overkill or the overkill equivalent this year, and so I had to equip a handgun, right? And for that one, I have no unlocks, and I'm gonna have to slog. So there's always a slog. I'm gonna have to spend my nights going through sniper rifles and weapons that I don't like, right? Just getting bodied, in order to get to, to again get through the grind to level those weapons up. That's just the nature of the game. So I'm having an okay time with it. I kind of like some of the tweaks that they've made where like now there's not perks, but now there's additional gear like your gloves and your boots and one other thing. And then that's how you unlock abilities, which kind of just in my mind makes more sense, right, than perks. You get access to different types of gloves, which enable you to swap weapons faster and to load faster, and that eventually, and body armor eventually gets you right access to overkill. So that type of stuff makes a little sense to me. I don't know that there's any other like super major wackadoodle changes to the game. They're all very kind of minor tweaks. So lots of the maps are back. Rust 24/7 is available in the game. I've heard some people complaining about the UI, but I'm like, it's yes, maybe it's bad, but I mean, it's the same bad that it was last year, right? And it's the same bad you're going to get when you start combining all these games in and having them accessible via the launcher. So I think the key thing for me that it brings out is, and I feel like Call of Duty has been leaning this way for a very long time. At a certain point, as Activision has hinted, we all start asking the question, why do I have to start over every year, right? If I've been playing the game right for a long time, why aren't there things that I can bring along with me? And I will say, having experienced this year, as a person who, I don't want to call myself again a veteran player, but not not starting from a standing start this year, I feel rewarded, right? And I'm okay with that. The cost of the game, yeah, that's again, every customer is going to be price sensitive to that, right? Depending on how they are. There are aspects of this, that I don't think are great. We're going to talk about Halo Infinite here in a minute. I'm actually have. They're both, now, funnily enough, they're both Xbox games. I feel a little more abused by that pricing structure, and we'll talk about that a little bit here in a minute. But the access to Modern Warfare 3 for what it provides at $60, and I bought it during the Thanksgiving sale at 15% off or whatever, so I paid $60 for it instead of I think $70. I didn't feel that bad about that. So every person will have to decide. The thing's going to go on sale. It'll be interesting to see how this thing lands this year. Vanguard still made great sales numbers. So we'll see how this thing goes. I have noticed that it went to sale a heck of a lot faster than I think most other Call of Duties have. So we'll see how it goes.
All right. Well, that's good to hear some positive news about it. I appreciate that. So yes, last week you two gentlemen spent some time talking about Halo Infinite and the current season. I want to give you just a little bit of time here tonight to check in on your status, if you're still playing, where that is, before we wrap up as well. In Game Logic, you hinted that you have some more to talk about around Halo. So, Tao, you've been playing on PC with some more Halo?
Yeah, I was able to jump on the PC this time. I think last week I had mentioned I'd played it on my Xbox Series X, and I wanted to jump on PC, and I am absolutely garbage at this game. I'll admit that right now. I don't know what happened because I used to be decent at it, but I am just terrible. I'm absolutely terrible. Try it on PC, try it on Xbox Series X, doesn't matter. Controller, keyboard, and mouse. I don't know what happened because like I said, I used to be pretty decent, and I'm just getting absolutely destroyed now. It also might be. I think I have to get into this frame of mind too with Halo, where you have the weapons, laid out across the battlefield. It's just not a loadout. Well, I mean, you start out with the loadout, and sometimes you have a different gun other than just the battle rifle. But for the most part, it's either the battle rifle or the
assault rifle.
Assault rifle, yeah, yeah.
Are you playing with controller?
I'm on PC. I'm playing with keyboard and mouse.
So that's new, right?
I mean, when Halo Infinite first came out, I was playing with keyboard and mouse. So, I mean, I do have a little bit of experience with it, and I wasn't too bad. I mean, at the very start, and maybe like I'm saying, like since everything's kind of spread out across the map, and maybe I just don't know the maps either. I didn't really play all that much when it first came out. I just got to get used to that mentality where I have to search out this weapon. Oh, I have to go get the sniper over here because it's always at a certain spot, or the sword and all this kind of thing. Which I'm not in that frame of mind. It's not Call of Duty like I mentioned last week. With getting back into Call of Duty, it was just like just like riding a bike. I was back into it after like a couple of games, and this one is just I don't know what it is. Like I said, I'm just terrible. Like I don't know what's going on, but I'm still having a pretty good time with it, even though I am getting destroyed. It's not as bad as Destiny when I play Destiny. When I've tried that multiplayer, that one's even worse, I think. And that's obviously that's a Bungie game, and this was kind of inherited Bungie game with Halo Infinite. So I don't know if there's like some weirdness going on there too, but I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Have you tweaked your graphic settings?
I did a little bit this last time. I mean, it runs fine. Like I don't have any there's no stuttering or anything like that or any lag or anything.
But I just mean in terms of like tweaking your graphic settings so you get 120 frames or more, just to see if that helps with your gameplay.
Oh yeah, no, I don't think so. I don't think I really did anything with that. But I don't know. Like I said, I'm still having a fairly good time with it, and I do want to kind of keep trying and keep pecking away at it. But yeah, that's pretty much it for me.
Yeah, I would definitely invest some time digging around in your settings and kind of optimizing. Like I said, if you've got a monitor, if you got a display for it, I know you have a RTX 3060. Is that right?
3070.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, you've got a 3070. It's got DLSS enabled now. I mean, so you definitely have access, to some higher performance stuff that will definitely, should help.
Yeah.
All right, Game Logic, your turn. Check in here on Halo Infinite before we move off to your final game.
Yeah, I think my thing, like I said, it didn't necessarily turn me off the game, but I will say, my criticism of Halo Infinite has been, just 343i just not really, taking so long to kind of adjust course to really making this a game as a service game, and fully embracing that, right, in terms of like the amount of content that delivers, and the frequency and the seasons. We've talked about that before. I do have to say, like, it does bug me that we do the battle pass. It's a half a battle pass, so it's 50 levels, whereas the battle pass in the past has been 100. It's 50 levels. There's the November 14th of cutoff of the free tier, and then instead of now LTEs or events, now we do operations. The operations run longer, but you either play the operation and you dedicate yourself to that at least for some period of time of the 4 to 6 week time period that they run. I wound up paying the 500 Halo credits for it because I'm behind now, right? So I fell off of season 3, so I'm only 64% through the battle pass of season 3. I didn't play season 4. That was the season that I just completely was out. And then I've got season 5, and I'm like, I'm just going to pay the 500 because I don't want to be bothered with, whether or not, right, time runs out, right? And I've got to, manipulate my gaming schedule to play, right, whatever. So that just feels, it just feels a little not great. If you had done a 100 tier battle pass, that would have been the thing. If you hadn't had the free tier cutoff, but like, it just feels like all of these like hyper contrived things that I feel like are unnecessary. I'm not even necessarily wrapped around the axle about like the cost or the impact. It's the cruft in my windshield, right? That I like have to be bothered with, right? Oh my God, this thing's going to expire and this thing's going to expire. Like, we've already had that before with events. But the events were like a small time window, and you were like, okay, I've got a bunch of time to clear my 100 tier battle pass. For this 2 week time period, I need to crunch and hyper focus on this event, right, and get everything that I can out of it. I will say the thing that is equivocal about it is they talk about that in these operations you're going to be able to go back and like get stuff that was locked away, I guess, in previous events. So where one big problem is like with the Yashoi or Yashiro or whatever armor, the Shogun kind of looking armor, that yes, they gave that to you, but then you couldn't go back and unlock any of the attachments to it. So hopefully they'll put that in the thing. But it just feels, again, going to the way these games always kind of fall off the edge of the map with like, they have the dozen different currencies right in the game to get access to stuff. It feels like a heading in that direction, just slightly different, right? With just a bunch of extra crap that now I have to be worried and bothered with. But I'm liking the game still. Like the physics, obviously, now, in Destiny 2 kind of being on the downward trend, maybe Halo Infinite maybe is arguable as being the game with the best gunplay. What I do like is I initially didn't like the map rotation, which it seems like they have some engine which they can kind of tune how that thing randomizes. I played, 3 hours or so today. I got a much better map rotation where I've never understood why they just don't randomize all of the maps. Like, they keep adding more maps but then they reduce the level of frequency that you get the old maps. And I'm like, no, like, I don't want to just play the new maps. Now that you have 20 maps in the bucket, what I want you to do is randomize all 20 of the maps. Like, don't randomize the new 5 and then like 1 out of every 20 times I get an old map. So tonight it felt like they had tuned it a little differently, and I like got some of like the old season 1 maps like Bazaar, and Cataclysm, Behemoth, some of the other things. So I like that, right? Some of the newer maps are fine and they're great and neat. But what I want is I just want the smorgasbord. Armor and attachments have come a long way. It's a lot nicer, right, in terms of kind of the cosmetics. Hopefully it'll continue going in in a positive direction for however long this thing lasts.
Great. Well, before we hit our final game of the night, Ramon, yes, I'm glad that you have achieved some DLS satisfaction there and the experience. We're going to go from that cutting edge technology back to some 2001 technology with a game that is I've been thinking about as we head into thinking in terms of what are some of the key remasters of the year. And this was the surprise drop, although we knew it existed. It was the surprise drop with a Nintendo Direct back in the spring, and Game Logic, you picked up Metroid Prime Remastered.
Yeah, so I took my Nintendo Switch LCD with me on Thanksgiving break when I went on travel.
OLED, correct?
No,
Or
LCD.
Okay.
Yeah, I still have
Just
the
making-
LCD.
Yep. Your original. Okay.
Yes, yeah, and I feel a little better about traveling with that one than kind of the nicer OLED, even though arguably both of those are getting near the end of their life cycle. But at any rate, the LCD still plays great. Metroid Prime still looks beautiful in handheld mode. What I really like is, Tao and I have often talked about kind of calibrating controls and how for years on the podcast, like I couldn't be bothered to calibrate controls, and then I would complain about like the controls not being tuned well. But this is a game that like out of the box, like for me, the controls are tuned great. I really like it. I got in the second level of the game. First level of the game. So this is a game where at least in the first level, you go in and you play the challenges of the first level, play the boss, and then you have a timed like escape, like the base kind of thing, and you're looking at this really tiny map and you're trying to figure out like all these colors. It's very much like the mini map in the Jedi series from Respawn, which has often been criticized as not having the greatest like intuitive feel to it in terms of its dimensionality and where you are on the map, and particularly in terms of its verticality. So you get a little bit of that, but other than that, it's a great package, right? You curl into the ball, and so you have these differences of mobility. Although the ball sequences are a little contrived, it would be nice if they were just open and you just really had like the option to do that at any time you wanted to. But in general, in terms of a Nintendo platform where you don't necessarily have a great legacy of shooters, it's a really solid shooter. It's really I like it. I guess the tipping point I'm on is whether or not some of the map sequences, just in terms of kind of how they unbuckle you, they don't really like tell you where you need to go. So I don't know if I'm gonna.
I mean, that's Metroid, right? Like this is not only is this kind of like 2001 kind of what waypointing in terms of the lack thereof, but also Metroid as a franchise has never really, classic Metroid has not necessarily talked you through unless there's Adam on a computer telling you which way to go. Like part of that is the open-endedness of good luck. You're this sense of isolation as you go out and in there. And yeah, the remaster is a really solid experience. I played it back in the spring. Ramon, you were talking about maybe picking it up. If you're ever curious about a Metroid like Prime, this is a great way to do it, because playing on a Pro controller, which is how I played it, it plays pretty much like any other. You can map it so it plays like most first-person shooters at this point, which is not something that was possible back in the GameCube days in terms of how it mapped buttons.
Yeah, that was going to kind of be my final comment. Like I played in handheld mode, but playing in handheld mode, I was like, this is a game that actually begs to be played, on the big screen. So I look forward to playing it in docked mode, now that I'm back.
All right, people, we are wrapping up the show for tonight. This has been episode 317. We'll be back next week with all of us probably here as we head into December. Rounding that corner, we will be here December 3rd for our first of December shows, which also means we're going to start thinking about kind of end of the year plans and how we're going to schedule that and what we're going to be talking about. As we've been hinting at this throughout the rest of the show, starting to think about our superlative show here on the Enough to Keep Going podcast. We don't do necessarily game of the years or genre categories. We have a variety of categories that are a little more eclectic, but also not as intentionally not as boundary defining. And so it allows us to talk more about the in-game experiences that we have enjoyed or have suffered through over the course of this year. So we'll be looking at those as well. And that's really what's on my docket for the coming week here is, now that I've got a bunch of smaller indie stuff installed on my Steam Deck, is to carve out some time, curl up, and kind of get us a few chance to experience some of the indie games that have been sitting on my list. So Tao, it looks like you're still going after some Pokemon and still trying to figure out your way through suffering through Halo Infinite and your skill cap there. So
Yeah, I'll keep slogging away at it. See how long I last before I bounce back off.
all right, and Game Logic churning through some Halo Infinite as well, sounds like.
Yep. Yeah, I'm about as much as I complained about the operation and kind of the contrived, forced right commercial path that Xbox is trying to lay out for you. I am about 11 tiers through the 20 tier operation pass. So, like I said, I'll feel my way through how weird this is. But I guess it strikes me as kind of weird that it's. We moved the time and expanded it, but it's not taking me any longer to choose. Like I'll be through the operations pass in a number of days. So I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, that's the plan.
Sounds good. Well, for myself, to be Hams, TowMaster99 and Game Logic, this has been episode 317 on the Enough to Keep Going network. We will see you all next week. Thanks for joining in. Thanks, Ramon, for coming by and joining in the chat. Everybody else who has a chance to listen to us, view us over the course of the next week, thank you for taking time to do that. We're always glad to engage with you during our show as well. So for myself, until next time, everybody, play the games you love those you play with, and be kind to yourself. Good night, everybody.